Twilight then stepped back, pondering what the scene meant, assuming like the others, and it hadn't happened yet. At least not yet. Maybe this is something that should happen, or maybe this has to happen, and if that other scene was going to be prevented. She nodded, liking the way that the last thought sounded. I'll be sure to let them know the next time I see them. If there's anything I can do, then I should try it. They'll think I'm insane, but I can't even imagine how I felt if I let them alone and just saw how they ended up happening. Maybe they'll think I'm crazy, but at least the two of them should still be alive. She heard more spotlights turn on to her left, illuminating a large, hollow cloud room that was notably hollowed out of a thunderstorm. It looked very dank and slimy, well as dank and slimy as the clouds could get, anyway. Dash was inside, poking around the rubble and trash inside. She seemed like she was looking for something, probably clues. Fluttershy entered, and the dull, bitter expression on her face made Twilight immediately know where this was all going. Dash, however, either didn't even notice or didn't care, because as soon as she saw her mare friend, she cantered her up to her and gave her a big bear hug. Fluttershy, where have you been? Dash said, nuzzling her before Fluttershy pulled away. I've been looking for you all over Cloudsdale for you. Well, that what's left of it. Anyway, I guess I shouldn't be worried, huh? You look great, she said, relieved smile. Fluttershy's expression softened. I'm glad to see you too, Dash. I thought I would never get to see you again. You know I could always come back for you, Shy, Dash assured softly. But why did you leave it in the first place? Fluttershy asked, her tone tinged with the slightest bit of accusation. Dash winced, knowing that she didn't have an answer to that question. Look, the dragon didn't... I can't do it, okay? I'm just glad you made it out of there okay. You didn't come back for me, Fluttershy said, tears welling up in her eyes. I could have died if I didn't find you here, Dash. Why would you leave me out in the open out there? Because I was told to come here, Dash said, not wanting to meet Fluttershy's gaze. I checked back when the dragon attacked, but no pony was there. I just thought that, well, maybe you made it out okay. Or the dragon ate me, Fluttershy pointed out. There was no blood, Dash protested. Fluttershy held her gaze. Dash exhaled. I'm so sorry, Fluttershy. Nothing like that will ever happen again. But you're here, and I'm here, and we're going to make it out of this. And that's what matters, period. Okay? She added, looking up at Fluttershy, doing her best to plead an expression. Fluttershy sighed, turning around. Dash, I want to know if you love me, she said. Of course I do, Dash said. I couldn't imagine life without you, Shy. I was so scared that thing of being attacked. I just had so hard to try not to lose it and go hunting after you. I knew you like that made it out there. How? Fluttershy asked. I just did, Dash stated. I'm the element of loyalty, Fluttershy. I would never leave you behind. Don't you trust me? Dash, I need to know if you're going to stay with me no matter how tough things get. I need to know that no matter what happens, that I could count on you to be by my side. I need you to know that you won't betray me like you did when we saw that dragon. Dash looked hurt. I didn't betray you. Yes, you did. You abandoned me, Fluttershy yelled, staring at the amount of intensity, and then she added, quieter. I thought I was going to die. Dash then drew up closer to her mare friend. I would never let that happen. I don't know if I believe that, though, Fluttershy said, staring at the floor. I don't know if you were going to keep up with your promises. You can't build a relationship on lies. Fluttershy, I know that, Dash said. Just give me some credit. Dash, I want to know if you had the choice. Would you have let me out of this for Celestia's sake and world, or would you save yourself? Fluttershy asked, suddenly staring intensively at the dark cloud floor. I would save you always, Dash said softly, not wanting for a response. She reached her hoof around Fluttershy and pulled her into a firm kiss on the lips, absorbing her and not letting her go until she was for sure that she had made it a point, and Fluttershy accepted it. Her passion was more intense than her partner's. The kiss seemed to last an eternity. Fluttershy abruptly broke away, though seized back into Dash's head with one hoof, and the side of Dash's chin with the other. Liar, she hissed. There was an awful pause with Fluttershy, since Dash in a death grip. drawing out something as long as she could, letting the dark dash soak in the terror of knowing a single twitch would cause paralysis. "I still love you," Fluttershy murmured. Before Dash could respond, Fluttershy screamed, twisted, and snapped her neck. She fell to the floor limply, not even uttering a sound. In utter silence, Fluttershy said nothing. She just stared at her hooves in shock, all for the world that seemed to stop for a minute, utterly frozen in time. She slowly turned, looking up at Twilight through the glass. At first she was confused, until she suddenly saw the hairs at the back of her neck were standing up, and her senses were going overdrive. She backed up only to hear the glass shatter from behind her, with the bloody blue hoof reaching into her chamber. More smashes. Dash now lacerated, and it was now approaching her just as Fluttershy was breaking out of her own illusion. Twilight managed to break out of the petrified stupor back up as the element of loyalty. Slowly ambled towards her, and the same dull-gazed look in her eyes when she had killed Fluttershy. Soon Fluttershy caught up with her as well as slowing her pace when she and Dash were side by side. Fluttershy stared right at Twilight with bitter, vindictive glare that ascended from the bleeding cuts all around her body. The two lovers spoke in eerie allusion. "All I ever wanted was some pony to tell me the truth," they echoed, their voices raw with betrayal, their breaths reeking for death. "All I want was some pony to love me." Twilight's lips formed words, but no noise escaped other than a faint squeak. Her back was now to the wall. Now her two friends were now bearing down on her, their murderous intentions clear. There was nothing she could do. She felt a crushing blow on the land on her head, right where the horn used to be. She saw the blinding light, and then bottomless darkness. Red. The color of passion, the color of rage, the color of love and war. The bloody wounds, all internal conflict. The color of dying gasps, the moments just before the final rest, and Twilight found her face covered in it. Gasping, she staggered to her hooves, wiping her thin, rusty pigment off of her snout and eyes. Her nose was stuffed up with whatever she had passed out in, and something honestly she was thankful for. Though the air around her was so thick and humid, she was afraid she would pass out again. Her head was pounding. The blow to her forehead was smarting, and her legs were still shaky and numb. Her body trembled to the effort of the remaining conscious. But she knew that if she let herself give up, then it was all over. She would never see the light of day again. She could never see Spike again. So she steeled to her nerves, closed her eyes, and waited for the pain to dull, for the shock to recede, and eventually for her ability to thankfully clearly return. Moments passed, hours passed. She either recovered immediately or for a stalwart, stubborn stand against the weakness that so sickened her she couldn't tell. Minutes or months, days or decades, wherever she was, she knew that if she opened her eyes to take the horror in, she might finally lose what bits of the sanity she had come to rely on. But that too was a big risk for her to take. But when her limbs ceased vibrating, and when the pain in and on her head faded to dull, warning ache, and that was when she was confident she would at least walk a few steps forward before resting again. She slowly wiped the dried substance off of her eyelids and opened them once more. She found herself suffocating in a warm chamber that was drenched from top to bottom in blood. There was so much of it. In fact, it seemed to have dripping from the ceiling, and it had pooled onto the floor. However, Twilight was noticed as she took a step on the blood, and on the ground didn't feel like the thick fluid she was used to seeing was a gush from her enemies. It was rough, soggy feel, and she soon realized why. On closer inspection, the blood was separating into water and plasma. It was just likely days old, but the environment too was wet and humid to keep it from clotting properly. Twilight gagged, and she knew if she could smell, she would have passed out. Fresh blood, though, was horrifying to her as well, was different a result of battle. This blood, however, reeked of death, so utterly in the fact that she inhaled could taste the iron in her tongue. She backed away, her legs sunk into the ground, and she felt the texture of flesh beneath her hooves. She shuddered, feeling her own courage crumble. It was more horrible than she could ever imagine. She hastily researched for the exit, but there was none. The only feature in the room besides the dying blood was a sword stuck in the middle of the floor. It was pure black, incredibly thin, and only a few centimeters wide. With its point stuck to the soft ground, its hilt was suspended into the air. It had a thick mouth guard its position, telling Twilight that the blades of itself was, when held in the mouth, that meant to be orientated right to the welder and used for charging and slicing attacks. The grip itself was padded with the custom tooth marks likely used from its original owner. It was the exact same sword as been Broken Alicorn had wielded, and it was the same sword that impaled Rarity and struck her in the shoulder. Twilight got the sinking feeling that she was going to have a fight. As if to answer, her pendant began to crackle and hiss slightly. The walls of it began to undult, and each individual pulse sending a ripple of humanity crashing through the room, and Twilight realized for a moment that the noise seemed to mimic through the frequency of her heartbeat. Ripples spread across the surface in the petrified blood, and all the back walls of the corridor slowly began to move, spreading apart how slow hoof steps could be heard approaching. Hastily, Twilight then pulled the sword out from the floor. Sounded as if it was being pulled almost most its recent victim. Her left cheek and most of her snout were covered by the hilt's guard, with the black blade pointing in the other direction. She noted that the blade itself was particular pattern on it, and it didn't seem to be made of steel. So she also noticed that the sword was balanced beautifully. Her teeth fit perfectly onto the grip, although the incidents had been clearly designed for a stallion, perhaps a guard. She could only attribute his dimension, his other world bending the rules, and leveling by playing the field for her sake, and the sake of whatever the fight was supposed to test. Her advisory entered its head. A very large proportion of the rest of its body was now down, hanging limply from the neck to limply, in fact. It appeared to be broken, but it didn't look like it had skin or any hair to speak of it. It seemed to have held together by only muscle, bone, and scab. It was a little taller than she was, but not by much. Its wings were plastered to its sides with the clotting blood, and its body was primarily reddish-brown, same as the old dead liquid that had flooded in this room. Twilight saw the butt of a horn, the smallest horn she had ever saw protrude from its eyeless, noseless, hairless head. Twilight had no magic. She had no tricks. Her head was pounding from the pain from the severed horn. Her heart was beating out of her chest as the adrenaline tore up and through her system. She could barely breathe. Her nostril could only be barely beginning to clear. She walked up with a limp, with a disoriented, and she felt like she was about to throw up a lung. But she had a weapon. She could fight. The monster, which can only be described as malformed, roared as if it wasn't as much as a roar, as though it was a strangled gargling sound, as blood sputtered from the seams all across the mass that was, supposedly, its body had malformed, charged at Twilight as its legs showing uprising amounts of speed, considering that it looked and sounded as if it wasn't alive, and it would never have been animated. Twilight then backed up before leaping to its side, raising an eyebrow, and malformed simply crashed into the wall behind her, spraying blood and sending a splatter of thick liquid up to the fleshy, bee-breathing walls of the chamber. Twilight breathing through her nose. Suddenly she recognized the sharp tang of bleach. No, not bleach. Hydrochloric acid. Malformed slowly turned against her again. The core of its body lurched and regurgitated gallons of blood in Twilight's general direction. She narrowly dodged the spray, wincing at the parts as it caught her pelt, causing her to sting burns. Wait a minute, she thought. She dodged another charge from the deformed monster. If I don't end this quickly, the acid from the malformed will accumulate on the floor, and I'll be disintegrated from the hooves up. At that realization, she went into a sudden offensive, waiting for the malformed to charge and then leaping up to behind it to its left, slashing it. For a moment she thought she only hit air, but then it was rewarded for her efforts. Then the malformed uttered its horrifying gurgling roar again, and she saw a long seam running down its shoulder. That wasn't there before. It retaliated, though, through its insurmountable panic speed, tackling Twilight to the ground, submerging her in the face of blood. Instinctively, Twilight reared its back legs back up in a revisory as she bucked, sticking her limbs into deep of what seemed to be her attacker's heart. Malformed brown and backward, and Twilight struggled to get to her hooves, gasping for the putrid air that was now in her savor. She could barely see the blood and death that surrounded her, as if her teeth had begun to chatter with anxiety as she saw the malformed recover. She had realized something critical. Her weapon had fallen increasingly adetic into the pool of separating blood. She barely had time to let out a panic yelp upon realizing this before the malformed she was on to her again, pursuing her with the primal lust and ancient hatred. It reared and then vomited its contents of its chest cavity towards Twilight. This time, however, she wasn't so lucky. Her muscles, even already screaming for oxygen, failed her. An acidic fighter licked up her flank, just over her cutie mark. She screamed as the chemicals set her skin alight with the tremble flares of pain. It was a feeling unlike burning to death. This as though she thought was going to her mind. So this is how I die. Malformed shrieked as Twilight staggered backward, only already wounded her hind leg, now completely numb. Her vision was blurry, her one eye sealed shut, her only weapon submerged in death. But she wasn't done yet. Even if she was going to die, even if she was gonna take this thing with her, as a last act of spite of the world that didn't even give her to a fighting chance. I'm so sorry, Spike. As a malformed broke into a gallop, aiming to stab Twilight through its heart with its tiny horn. She twisted violently to the side, as if then, last-ditch effort, wrapped her front hooves around the advisory's neck, and squealed, and a dull crunching sound fell into her ears, and smashed its trachea with it snapped its spinal cord, and she felt the vibrations raining through its neck as Malformed gurgled in its final death throes. Twilight's front lips were on fire from the monster's acidic skin, and she could feel herself pelt beginning to rub off as she struggled to hang on, but she didn't care. Malformed and collapsed. Twilight then fell alongside of it, propping herself up onto its body so that she could at least breathe, at least offer herself one last chance of survival. One last fleeting opportunity to see Spike and Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy and Celestia and all of her friends again. She leaned up against the blood so she didn't have to succumb to death that crept up to her chest, soaking her half-burnt-off pellet in brown. She couldn't feel free of her legs. Her breath was a slow wheeze. Why any little movement she made caused her pain to fourfold anything she had felt before. And she knew that the acid around her legs and torso was slowly digesting her as well. No pony won that fight, not Twilight, and certainly not the malformed. And as Twilight felt the darkness approach her, she saw a few spots perform the ballet on what she saw. She whispered to no pony in particular, "I tried so hard. Please, just please." But even then she began her journey into the ultimate darkness. She didn't even quite know what she was asking for.